Well, hi, everybody, and welcome again to the musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpade.
And today we are talking with Nell McCormack Abom, who is a person that I've known for a while. She and I worked together in television for a while. She hosted a television talk show on the local PBS for a long time, and now she's got her own business. But before we get into all that, Nell, welcome to the Innertube.
Well, thank you so much, Don and John. And I just wanted to say you get an A-star for pronouncing my complete name correctly, which very rarely happens. Nell McCormack Abom. Any derivation thereof you can imagine I have received, including mail that has come to Noel, Neil, Nels, Nolan. I could go down the list. But anyway, so it's a pleasure to join someone who accurately says my name.
That and the fact that I know your husband, Jay Abom, and he would beat the heck out of me if I missed it.
That's right. We always had to watch our kids growing up when we would go on trips at the airport. Be careful. Don't say our last name too much.
Right, exactly.
Now, you've been a journalist for a long, long time. Let's talk about, before we get into the stuff about your new business, let's talk about your old business, about journalism. And let's talk about how important it is right now to have good journalists on guard.
Wow, Don and John, as you know, the pace of change in society is just incredible. It's breakneck. It's literally minute to minute. And the same is true with the way in which we process news and the way news is presented to us. It is more than a 24/7 cycle. It really is minute to minute, and the news can change. But you wonder, how much does it really change? All of that airtime has to be filled. And so there's a lot of speculation. There's endless punditry about everything that's going on. It's overload, I think, for the American people, particularly when we have like three dynamic things happening at one time, the pandemic, the recession, and a presidential election, all of which are fraught with their own tensions and uncertainties and disappointments. And so people are having to process quite a bit of information, as well as their own personal stuff, which is, do they have a job? Do they have health care? What's happening with their children's education? Particularly, are the schools going to open this fall? How are they going to teach kids? And if you have college students, I'm paying all that money for tuition. What kind of class setting are you going to choose? And if it's not bricks and mortar, should there be a difference in price? So people are just being inundated with messaging on every front. And it's hard to find out what are the trusted sources you have. And Don and John, as you know, right now, the media's credibility is under fire. And Pew Research studies, or if you like to look at Poynter Institute, all of them show a declining respect and trust of the media. Some of that has been fueled by this president, I would say, in unprecedented ways. He's gone after the media as, quote, the enemy of the people. It's unconscionable to me that that is happening. But at the same time, the media hasn't helped itself. And I'm happy to talk about that too. I think the media in general have made some mistakes along the road here.
What are some of those mistakes, Nell?
Well, one of the biggest ones to me, and a person who spent her career, I like to say, looking for the context of news. Why are things happening? What's the thing behind the thing? Why did the politicians make this choice? The elected officials choose this path in public policy? You don't have a lot of time now, or reporters who are really digging that way. So what you have is kind of superficial coverage on the one hand. You have this declining, shrinking base of local news sources as well. The dynamics of the revenue streams just aren't there for the business model that we've had to date. But the other thing, I think, nationally, the beginnings and then the evolution of cable news coverage has really hurt our intellectual dissection of what's happening in the world. And I don't like, for instance, that CNN and MSNBC, I'll put those in a box first, have completely abdicated their evening newscasts to opinion journalism. Don Lemon, Chris Cuomo. If you come home from work, you haven't had time to listen to the news, and the first thing you do is turn on those two sources, you're getting one view of the world. If you turn on Fox News, you're getting a completely different view. Again, Fox News has abdicated its evening program to one monolithic kind of thought stream, which is conservative. The other two are on the far end of liberal. I think that's a mistake. I really do. I think in some ways, I understand what the journalists are trying to do, which is to say, when you are faced with a relentless stream of untruths coming from the White House, from the Oval Office, you have to think of things differently. I understand that, but you've paid a price for that. And the price for that is the erosion of public trust in the media as fair, balanced, accurate, not taking sides. And it's an interesting debate because I know lots of journalists who would say, you're not taking sides, you're standing up for the truth. If lies are coming, then you have to counter that with the truth. But I fear that we've taken it a step too far when it comes to particularly the cable news outlets. And sometimes there's a lot of snarkiness to regular news coverage. I say the papers, though most people read it digitally. They seem to have an edge. And believe me,
Right.
philosophically, I might agree with them 100%, but I'm saying it's not good for journalism.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about it?
Well, one thing I want to say that might surprise some folks. One person I've had a chance to hang out with a little bit is Shepard Smith from Fox, who for a long time ran the actual news part of Fox. And most people wouldn't tune into Fox until after his newscast. They actually never
Right.
saw the actual news that Fox did, which, if they looked at it, would look an awful lot like the news that it actually pretty much played it down the middle. He said to me several times that he was sorry that what had happened. That is to say that Fox has become basically identified with the opinion side. If people actually looked at the newscasts that they would do, like the evening newscast, it's actually a fairly professional newscast. And I think Shepard Smith, strangely enough, really, that's what he wanted to do. And I'll give you a good example. When he went personally to New Orleans on the night that Hurricane Katrina hit, he was the one to stand on the bridge and say, "Where's the government? Why are we letting the poor people and the black people around here down?" He was the guy who launched into the government first. You know what I mean? And he doesn't get enough. So I think that, it's interesting. The tide of, and I think you're right here, the tide of opinion is so huge. It sometimes drowns out the fact that there are hundreds and thousands of people trying to do a job. We're trying to tell a story that our editors gave us to cover, And you're right. I mean, the numbers are dwindling, especially the local numbers, and that's a terrible thing. But it's getting drowned out by the tide of partisan voices, and they've made a choice at MSNBC and CNN not to allow the administration to get away with out and out untruths. And so it makes them look, strangely enough, partisan when what they're trying to do is correct the record.
Yeah, I would also say, and this is something that, Nell, you and I have experience in, and that is when you're on a local television station, you wind up being a personality, whether you like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I did the weather for a long time on a local TV station, but prior to that, on a couple of different stations, I was a reporter, and I would go out on the scene of something, and everybody would recognize me and say hi. And that was kind of, when you're trying to be a reporter, figuring out what went on and getting all the facts in line and hearing from both sides or hearing just what went on, and people are coming up to you and wanting your autograph. It's kind of weird, isn't it?
Well, it is. And the other thing I would say is, and this troubled me for a long time, I never liked it when real broadcast journalists would either play themselves on a fictional TV or movie or play another character who wasn't themselves. And I thought that was a failing both on their part, but also on management, just to say there's a clear line here that has to be drawn. We are journalists. We're not actors. If you want to be an actor, go to Hollywood, get your SAG card. But if you are a journalist, that isn't what you should be doing. So that line started to blur a long time before
Yeah,
Donald Trump was in office, before Barack
sure.
Obama was in office. The media started to do that. And there's a cult of personality, especially with television, because face it, viewers watch the program. For instance, for 12 years, I hosted Smart Talk. I think there were people who watched because they liked in-depth conversation about the issues that affected the local area, but there might be a few people who watch because they liked me. And what's interesting is, as a woman, when I first started doing that show, we only had a half an hour. And so, being a Philadelphian, I talked fast. I was a bit aggressive. I think in my reporting career, people always noticed that about me. And so I quickly would ask questions, or I'd interrupt and I'd do things. And boy, they got a cavalcade of responses. Why is that woman such a B word? Or, she's way too aggressive. She needs to back off. And I got some really good advice by Angel Hernandez, who at the time was the vice president of programming, I believe, there. And he just said to me, you can ask your question, and it can be a hard question, but you can do it with a smile or just your body expression, your facial expressions, and those kinds of things. And so I began to work on that, and I could still ask the tough questions, but I moderated how I looked. And I wonder how many times, Don, in your career, you were asked to change the way you asked questions or how you facially appeared to satisfy the viewership out there who thought you might be the other B word, I guess, for a
My
guy.
my very first time out, I covered it was AIDS Day. In December, they have an annual day that they devote to paying attention to AIDS. And so that was one of my very first assignments. And I went out and talked to various people about how they were responding to it. And then the news director said, okay, we're going to go live. You go down to Riverfront Park, which here in Harrisburg is right next to, obviously, the river, the Susquehanna River. And it was a little windy. And the first reaction I got, or the first critique I got, was do something with your hair. It blew all over while you were talking. Um, Not anything about the facts of the story. The fact is that my hair looked mussed. So yeah, basically there were a lot of, and eventually, when I started doing the weather, as I aged, I gained a little weight. That was a topic of conversation a number of times. So yeah, basically, your appearance comes first and foremost, and then what you're doing comes kind of after that. And I was never comfortable with that. I always, I mean, not only uh, did I think that was pretty superficial, but on top of that, it's okay. Well, let's talk about the story. What did you think of the story? But I basically could put the story together whatever way I wanted and have it go on the air. And I don't know about when you were doing stories, but there was no editor between me and putting the story on the air. I came back, I worked with a photographer to put the story together, and then it slammed on the air. And if there was anything wrong with it, we'd find out later. And I didn't like that either.
Yeah, they had an editorial process, but when you're doing live television, it can get really crazy. So that was a whole different dynamic there. But I think the other thing that has changed significantly in the last 15 years is really the emergence of social media, and in particular Twitter, when it comes to news coverage. And reporters today are judged by their following. How many followers do they have on all of these social
That's for
networks?
sure.
And how much engageability, how much are people interacting with their content? And so you have the creation of personalities. They're not just journalists, they're personalities, and they like to let their personalities show. And without naming names, but I think you could take a look at any of the reporters in Pennsylvania, their Twitter feeds, and you get a sense of the kind of personality they have. What happens sometimes, though, is they go beyond that again and they give their opinion. And I'm saying, I thank God I'm not still a journalist, because I think I'd have trouble containing myself and my own personal opinions. But that should be their public facing persona. And because their job as a journalist is not to tell you, unless they're an opinion writer, what they think, it's to tell you what's happening, to give you perspectives on different angles on the story and things like that, to allow you to come to your own conclusion. But that's becoming increasingly obsolete, I
Yeah.
think, in today's journalism. And that's where I get frustrated. And the other thing, having been a television journalist, a woman television journalist, Don, of course, critiqued on appearance all the time. People always commented on that. But one thing I don't like, and I see this happening, is women who are on television today, especially with Instagram, it's all about their fashions, their hair, their this and their that. And I think for every step we've taken forward, damn it, we're taking steps back, because it's coming back to how hot do you look, what's your fashion trend, and not necessarily the substance of what you're reporting about the community and the kind of journalist you are. And that disappoints me.
Yeah, my wife was in journalism for a long time as well, and that was always her thing: is look, if you're going to be an anchor on television, wear a business suit or something that you would wear to work 9 to 5 in an office. Don't come in dressed in a halter top. She was very, very, very adamant that people dressed businesslike when they were delivering the news, because that's then the reaction you would get. They wouldn't be leering and drooling all over you. They'd
No,
be
but
listening to what you
I
said.
think speaking up for women and their fashion sense, you can be very fashionable. And I always say I really like women who express their personality in what they wear to a certain extent. You know what I mean? They're letting you know what I liked bold colors. Okay. For instance, I have no problem with that. But I always look at somebody like Nora O'Donnell, who anchors CBS Evening News. She used to do the CBS Morning News.
Yep. Hmm.
She's been a White House reporter. She's been, a reporter for years and years. To me, she is classy. And I
Don't you think
think
so? I
when
have to say, yeah, she really
look at
is.
the airwaves. That is a privilege to be able to broadcast to America every single day in the morning or in the evening. Just dress in an appropriate and classy way. You can have your style, but that doesn't mean you have to emphasize that. It's really just presenting the news. It's not about you at the end of the day, it's about the content. And I just want journalism to get back to that, be about the content. So the thing I advise folks who talk to me about, how do you keep track of everything? I look at multiple sources. I listen to talk radio, where I get the conservative bent on everything. I was just listening this morning
Right.
to that Glenn Beck show, and I might slam the dashboard or whatever, but I'm becoming aware of what the other side thinks about these issues and why they're reasoning their support for the president's policies or the president himself. And
Absolutely.
that's part of the homework of democracy. Not a spectator sport. We're all participants, and you got to do your homework, even at a minimum level. So in a year like this, check PolitiFact. Check. I love Glenn Kessler in the Washington
Yep.
Post.
Absolutely.
Uh, David Folkenfleck, who reports for NPR and kind of keeps you up to date on sort of what's happening in the media. I know some people don't like Brian Stetler, but he also tries to look at what the media is doing and look critically at it. At the same time, I don't in any way want to say that I don't respect so much of what journalists do. They are on the front lines of recording history. And history will judge this time very carefully, I think, unlike the speed with which we're coming to judgments today. But I respect what they do. It's not a crime. They're not the enemy of the people. They are the people who will save this democracy by exposing the truth to light.
I think one thing that those who record this era will say is that this was a golden age for investigative reporting. It's amazing to look at the amount of that's the toughest kind, and that's the kind that many news organizations have to rest on in the end. Is what did they find out that no one else could find out? And I'm thinking of Maggie Haberman and other folks like that. Just astounding reporting, and that stuff is hard. That is the old fashioned walking on the sidewalks, talking to people face to face, getting sources. I mean, it's astonishing what is, and it's not just New York Times and the Post, although they've been amazing. It's been all over the country.
And
Yeah.
the Capitol Press Corps here in Pennsylvania. The folks, that's a much smaller newsroom than when I first came to Harrisburg in the mid 1980s. I came to Harrisburg and we had a full newsroom up there in the Capitol. Not true so much anymore. But the ones who are really focused, Angela Columbus, Brad Bumstead, all the folks at Spotlight PA, they're doing a phenomenal job of continuing to dig behind the documents, the trail of true evidence, I like to say, about
Yeah.
what the political figures are doing. We have to support that now. And so I encourage people, even if it's one news outlet that you can afford, if you could get a subscription to that news outlet, you're helping local journalism keep the sunshine, the light on the works of government. Because if we let that fall into darkness, a key pillar of our democracy is in danger of crumbling. And if that free press crumbles, if that those guardians of what I like to say, guardians of truth, getting to the essence of what happened, if we let them tumble down, I don't know where we're left. I really don't.
And what I think is interesting about what you're talking about, the Capitol Press Corps here in Harrisburg, covering the state government of Pennsylvania, when the regular newspapers started to fall by the wayside and not cover what they were covering, when the television stations sort of became personality outlets, a lot of these journalists, Angela, as you talked about, Brad Bumstead, some of the others, went and put together Spotlight PA, which is supported by all the major newspapers, and PA Post, which is online,
Mm-hmm.
and they're kind of independent of any heavy hand from any news organization. They're there to get into the facts, to put the stories together, and to present those stories in an unvarnished way to people.
But somebody like Dennis Owens at ABC 27, if you're here in the Harrisburg area, he's an anchor for the news there, but he also does investigative reporting along with Kendra Nichols. And I really appreciate that. Dennis will look at legislation and he'll really dig into why it's important or what's happening with it. And he does investigative work. And that's a commitment that their station has made as well, to give him the time to do that and Kendra the time to do that. So I appreciate that. Brian Roche at WGAL, he's doing investigative pieces. And you can see that Brian Sheen at CBS 21 does a lot of work with children's issues, child abuse, child protection. And again, in that instance, Sinclair Broadcasting has given him the opportunity to do that. And I, as someone who used to represent Pennsylvania Family Support Alliance, which did a lot of work with training people on mandated reporting, I sincerely appreciate that because children have no voice. And I do work now for Dauphin County Court Appointed Special Advocates, and the same thing. Brian has done some stories for us there. So there are still reporters out there every day who are doing the really good work, and I want to salute them because it's not easy. I think a lot of times all they get is cars honking at them, not in support, but in derision. And that's a shame.
All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the other things. You've left journalism, you've branched out a little bit. You said that you're working with one of the county agencies. But the biggest thing that I've seen is that you have your own, what is it, a consulting firm? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Sure. It's eponymous, so it's Nell McCormack Abom Communications, and I do public relations, media relations, writing, a lot of media training for executives or public officials, or just people who want to feel more confident in an interview setting or making a speech. Um, it's really fun. I enjoy helping people find their voice and to use it to their best ability, using all of their tools, which is your mind, your body, your voice, your physical presence. So that really energizes me a lot. But I represent a host of clients, both commercial businesses as well as nonprofit clients, and I've been doing that for 6 years. When WITF pulled the plug, sadly, on the TV version of Smart Talk, it was one of those moments where I looked at other television jobs, but I was spoiled at WITF. I really enjoyed the in-depth conversation kind of journalism. I really wasn't ready to go back to covering fires and murders, standing on street corners. So I saw that at least locally, the path wasn't there. And so I started my own public relations firm and pretty quickly got a couple of really great clients. I like running my own business. I like the diversity of clients I have. It's every day something different. And it's just that diversity of assignments and helping companies who just have questions about how to best get their message out or how to publicize a product or a service that they have, and just brainstorming creative ideas all day. I love that kind of job.
Let's talk about the fact that you're a small business. You have yourself, and you said you partner with others every once in a while, but mostly you just run the business yourself. Are you working with other small businesses? And if so, how tough is it at this point, after the big shutdown, after the pandemic, to get yourself up and going and rolling again?
Well, it was really tough because, as a matter of fact, Lucy of Lucy Nazo Promotion Strategies and I were working, for instance, with a client in Harrisburg, and it was fantastic. They had many plans in place coming up in April and May. But once the governor made the decision that everything had to shut down, and I understand that decision, events became obsolete. And that was a core part of our business, which was live events, whether it was musical performances, at Hershey Vineyard, or it was Whitaker Center hosting the very first high school esports championship. We were all geared up for that, very excited. Any kind of live event like that, or anything having to do with nonprofits holding gala events. Just imagine, Don, all of that shut down. And if your business is centered on that, it really was a shock to the system. Because one thing about public relations, it's 24/7, you're moving all the time. And all of a sudden, this break just went on everything. So we sort of had to, I think those of us who did this kind of public relations, reimagine ourselves. And what do we do? Well, what are our skills? Writing, helping people plan their strategies for communications. There are lots of businesses that never had the luxury of time or maybe attention to focus on how do I communicate with the public, both my direct stakeholders, the public I want to reach to buy my new product or service, the people who just want to learn a little bit more about this topic. How do I make my website, my social media channels, and any event that I would do more resonant with all those people? And that's what I really specialize, helping businesses narrow down what do they want to talk about, how best can they communicate that message. That's more important than ever now, because the biggest question people have, are you open? What are you doing? How are you serving food? Or how do we get your product? Is it sanitized? Think about all those things. Schools, it cuts across the whole dynamic of our economy. Everybody's been affected. So we had to rethink our businesses and work a little bit harder to let the word out of what we do and how we can help them. Because at the end of the day, public relations is about relationships, which, as you have done, Don, over the years, we forged long-standing relationships with many journalists and organizations. One other thing people might not know, I spent a decade in state government. I worked as a senior advisor on communications to Governors Bob Casey and Tom Ridge directly. And then indirectly, I've helped at least 3 other governors with some messaging projects as a consultant. And that window onto how state government works has introduced me to a lot of legislative leaders, government leaders, people around the state. There are very few places I haven't been in Pennsylvania, but one of them is the Grand Canyon of Pennsylvania. And by golly, I'm determined to get there.
Well, Don and I, we were there with our families years and years ago.
Yes.
We had a great weekend there.
Wait a minute. You vacation together and you're still friends?
Yes. Yes, and it was when our kids were little and we couldn't keep track of them. They were running all over the campground.
Oh my gosh!
And,
yeah, they couldn't help themselves. It was fun.
And
Wow.
and the other thing I remember is we burned a picnic table. We brought a little portable grill, and it burned into the picnic table.
Yeah, and we both signed it and dated it so they could,
Oh my gosh!
Well,
I'm just glad Smokey Bear didn't have to mobilize.
I think that
You didn't start a forest fire, I hope.
It's one of the most beautiful views in the entire state, and it's really worth seeing. And the campground is really lovely. I mean, it's a great place to drive up to. The kids still talk about it.
One of the things when I worked in the governor's office, I really had no idea at the time I was working there. So we're looking at the 90s. Pennsylvania, I think at that time, was the 17th largest economy in the world. I had no idea. You think about that. It had the 17th largest. I think we're now like 20th or something like that. Um, but the breadth of experience I was able to enjoy there. We went on trade missions around the world. I was in Singapore, Japan, Ireland, Israel, Scotland. We signed the Caverner shipyard deal that brought the Caverner
Ah,
shipyard
yes.
to Philadelphia. I was in East Germany at that time, and Pennsylvania, fortunately, at that time, had the money. The economy was rocking and rolling, as you know, and Governor Ridge, of course, was very dynamic and very much about Pennsylvania will be a leader among states and a competitor among nations. And it's hard to do that just sitting in Harrisburg. So I saw what went into global trade missions, and I can tell you there wasn't a lot of downtime. We were working night and day, meeting with tons of people, doing events, and it was very exciting. And I'm kind of sad to see that the economy has really forced the Commonwealth to pull back a bit from that. We have representatives for the Commonwealth around the world in different settings. They're contractors they hire who advocate for our companies over there. And so it was a fascinating window. I say I've had one of the best careers ever. I've just absolutely loved it.
Let's get back to what you were talking about earlier, and that was advising businesses on how to get back on their feet. Not only people want to know when they're open and all that, but the whole business is about things like wearing a mask and not wearing a mask. How do you tell a business how to handle something like that?
Well, look, the governor has said he's not intending to enforce it. It's not like the state police or the local police are going to be dispatched to enforce mask wearing. This is about common sense and common decency to each other, I think. But what I've said is follow the dictates of the state, the best practices and guidelines from the CDC and the Department of Health. That's all you can do. It's a lot to ask your employees to enforce the mask wearing because when you do so, all you have to look is dial up Facebook or Twitter, and you will see the kinds of horrible interactions that have been going on where workers who stop folks coming into the store just to simply tell them you're supposed to be wearing a mask get spit upon, beaten, things thrown at them.
Right.
It's just insane. We have to come back to civil discourse and being kind to one another. And that sounds, what does it sound, corn pony or something? But let's face it, this is how we exist as a civil society, is recognizing each of our humanity. Everyone is a human being. Everyone is deserving of our respect. And to wear a mask is to show respect. It's not authoritarian government telling you what to do. It's common sense. We're going to do what we can to mitigate this until there is a vaccine or some kind of drug available.
It's interesting that this is one of the few places in the world where things like social distancing and wearing masks has been so rigidly partisanized. It just shows you that the United States is really sort of over to itself in a way. We have a special, well, I wouldn't say special, but we have a specific political and social thing going on because it's pretty clear what needs to be done. You
Yeah,
know,
well, think about it though. Americans love their liberty, right? We might not have registered with the Libertarian Party, but generally we like the idea that the government doesn't dictate what we have to do. So, on that level, I understand it. I understand as well, it's hot wearing a mask when it's 95 degrees outside. I've gotten those sort of white and blue ones that are, they look like surgical masks, but they're not the official ones. And that's about as light as you can probably get right now. And you know what? I'm fortunate that I don't have to wear it all day long in a work setting. But when I have interactions with the public, I'm wearing the mask because it's protecting you, John. It's protecting you, Don. And if you do the same thing, you're protecting me. That's what the American spirit is all about. We're in this together, and we are not acquiescing to government tyranny. We're saying we respect each other, and I want to help you stay healthy. And you know what? If we all do our part, we're going to get over this thing faster. Our businesses are going to be able to up and running. The day is going to come when we can have events, and people like Nell McCormack Abom can have a business where I'm helping companies have big parties and everyone's having a great time. But if we don't do these simple things, I think this virus is going to be around for a long time.
Now, I'd love to hear your take on the state of small business right now, because I know in so many ways they've gotten the squeeze and they've gotten hit really hard, and they are the backbone of the country's economy. I'm wondering what you're seeing out there in what you do and what you could tell us.
Well, yeah, I mean, 2/3 of the jobs I think in this country are generated by small businesses.
Exactly.
Uh, it's a thriving part of Pennsylvania's economy. My husband has a small business. He has a law firm in Carlisle. I can tell you very dramatically, he has about, I think, 15 people working for him in various capacities. Some are attorneys, some are support staff, an office manager. The crisis of this pandemic was very real to him as well, because he didn't want to let people go. He didn't want to have layoffs. He knew that they were sustaining families on those jobs too.
Mm.
And that PPP loan program for small businesses was essential. What's sad is that it became first come first serve kind of, and so a lot of people got shut out of that. But those kind of loan programs were essential. What are we seeing? Look, the hotel industry, the restaurant industry, bars, they have been just devastated, as have mom and pop shops, as I'll call them, in whatever industry you want to think, whether it's t-shirt making, signage. The big stores were able to stay open through this, but those little mom and pop shops that dot towns across Pennsylvania have really suffered. I think many of them have done the best they can to take advantage of the PPP loan programs, and hopefully those loans would be forgiven. But if they're not, they're going to have some difficulty, obviously, paying them back. But I think they are trying to restart while staying within the social distancing and safety precautions that the state and the CDC have recommended. But I think it's going to be a long road. I was reading some economic forecasts this morning, and they're talking about another decade. It will take a decade for the job picture to come back to where it had been post the 2008-9 debacle of a
Yes.
recession. And we had just climbed out of that. Think about it. We had just kind of come back. And so I have three young people in my life, my children, and the oldest one is employed. He's out of college. He has a great job. My daughter will be graduating this coming year, and my son will be graduating in 3 years. And once again, America's young people who have invested in their college education or have invested in their skills training are facing this huge wall. And what I'm saying is, we're all in this together. Let's support American businesses, American made products, the stores down the street from you. And that's all we can do, really, to try to help them turn around. And if they need public relations assistance to get that message out, that's what we do. And media relations as well. We have great relationships with TV, radio, digital communications. You have to use them all in today's market to the best you can. And we all just have to pull together. That's what's going to get us through this.
This makes me reflect that one thing that people may not know about small businesses is that even the very successful ones are very sensitive to changes in the economy, and in terms of cash flow, could be very close to the line, even at times of great success for that business. So that something like this, where suddenly it dries up completely, right? especially
It did.
especially if you're the kind of business where you're an open door business and you want foot traffic and it's just not there anymore.
And you know what, John? It was overnight. It was a
Yeah,
switch.
no, it
It
hits.
was it was suddenly a switch
It was
that
like a
went
toggle
off.
switch. It was like a toggle switch on the wall, and the hand of God just went off. you know,
Wow.
you know.
It was pretty brutal. I know there were a couple weeks at the beginning, you're sort of in shock. And then I think there was this period, it's like the 6 stages of grief or something. I think there was then a period of 2 weeks where I watched a lot of Netflix. I read some books, but I was like, okay, I've got to focus. I've got to get my plan together. And I've read some articles as well where people said, hey, it's okay to just sort of downsize for a minute, like shut your brain down a little bit and just deal with this. And I admire the folks who were able to just stay up and keep going. But I think many of us found that we did need to lean on shoulders during that time. And now that we're coming back, uh, I've read people are working 80 hours a week. And that's true. If you have your own business, believe me, you're putting in a lot of time right now because you're hustling for new work. You're trying to meet the demands of the clients you have and the expectations that they have. But then you're also trying to figure out, how do I do this safely? And there's a lot of research involved in making sure that you're giving the best advice you can. So it's a time of a lot of energy exertion, mentally, physically, and everything.
Let's talk about the future, Nell. We got all of the problems that we've been talking about over the last few minutes, and there are a lot of people I know that look and say, "Oh my God, we're so deep in a ditch we'll never get out." But are you optimistic about the future, about how America can climb out of the rut it's in right now and get itself righted?
Absolutely. I think look at the resilience of this country. Sometimes I've gotten down in the depths of despair, particularly given our national leadership, which I don't see a lot of leaders. I don't see a lot of leaders in it, and that's frustrating to me.
Mm.
But I think that my husband will always remind me, we started with a revolution, right? And they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor.
Mm.
I don't know if you ever watched that John Adams series, but when they show that moment of when they decided to sign the Declaration of Independence, it sends chills up your spine because you put yourself in that position, this vision, this idea of a country like this, and knowing what you were facing with the empire of Great Britain against you. It was hard to believe. But in any event, this is a country that comes back. We came back over after the Civil War and we united. We can do it again. We came back after the world wars. World War I was the war to end all wars. Well, it didn't. We had World War II. We came back after Korea, after Vietnam, and the whole social unrest of the 60s. And in a lot of ways, it feels like that right now because we have this path to racial justice that we're on. We're not nearly there. Our effort to make a more perfect union continues every single day. But I have faith in the American people because we have every resource you could imagine. We have the natural resources here. We have the will to get things done. And we do know that we can rise from horror, that we can rise from deprivation. Think of the Great Depression. Think of the recession of 2008. We've done it before. We'll do it again. But the only way we're going to do it is together. And we need to find common language, civil discourse, resolutions to problems, and we need leadership in the Congress to get stuff done. Enough. I think that's what this election should be about. We need progress. We need unity. We need to come together in a way that's not denigrating each other on the basis of anything. Your skin color, your race, your religion, your creed, who you love. Let's just move forward. It's 2020. It'll be 2021 next year. Let's turn the page. Let's start anew. Let's get it done.
I feel like after the 4th of July, I should be playing drums and fifes behind
That was inspirational. Like,
but we can't be. Look, I'm Irish. You guys are both Irish. What are we? We're sort of melodramatic people, right? I love the sad movies, the dramas.
yeah, absolutely.
I'm not necessarily always the comedy person. So for the love of God, I better look to the bright side, or I'd be in the wallows of depression.
The other thing is you can't let an Irishman's dander up. You can't get that going.
Don, one quick story. So Governor Casey told me that and he writes about it in his book. He said that Irish soldiers were always buried standing up. Why? Because the Irish are always ready to fight. And I'm ready to fight for this country and for everybody else.
And it also made for a smaller plot.
Exactly. They only had an island, right? They only had an island.
Exactly. Hey, thanks very much for being with us today, Nell. It was a real pleasure.
It really was. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Don.
And as always, thanks to you for listening. If you'd like to get in touch with us, our email address is musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com. And we're on Twitter. I'm at DonRooney9, and John is @JTimPayne. Also, we have our website, Musical Innertube, that's musical spelled with 2 A's, MUSICAAL, Innertube, all one word, @Libsyn, LIBSYN.com. We're also on Stitcher. We are on SoundCloud. We are on iTunes. You can give us a review there. And we are on YouTube. And by the way, YouTube has some really, really old episodes of the Innertube if you'd like to check out Musical Innertube on YouTube. Also, thanks to the virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing our theme music.